The following is episode 3 of the Octagon of Reason, a conversation with Professor Eric Sampson. We talked about various topics, from the competitiveness of capitalism and why it benefits everyone involved, to whether morality is invented or discovered, and why, in his view, Christianity accurately depicts who God truly is. So before we get ready to step into the Octagon, make sure to subscribe to the channel, give this video a thumbs up, and tell us what you thought of the episode in the comments down below. Also, follow us on Spotify as well as Apple Podcasts. Just search Octagon of Reason and you should be able to find us there. I post a lot of Octagon of Reason content on my socials, so make sure to follow me on Instagram, Twitter, as well as LinkedIn. The handles should be on the description of this video. So now, without further ado, my name is Kelton Giovanni Masinga, and this is the Octagon of Reason. If you have already watched the first episode, you know that I began my journey as a political economy major under Professor Stephen Wales, who happened to be the first guest of the show, in a class designed to further explore the answers to the questions: what is equality? What is freedom? What is justice? And so many other fundamental political questions. As I continue to take my baby steps in the exciting political economy field, I took a class that, in a way, at least to me, seemed to have been the application of the concepts discussed in Professor Will's class. I went from asking what is justice to ask if it is just for CEOs to earn 5 times more than their employees. Are employees being exploited in today's age? Are sweatshops a form of said exploitation, or in reality, just a way for those who are in extreme poverty to provide for themselves as well as their families? What exactly is exploitation? And so many other questions. So those are some of the concepts and questions that I wrestle with for an entire semester under the guidance of today's guest. He's a postdoctoral fellow of philosophy at Rhodes College. He earned his bachelor's degree in philosophy at the University of Tennessee and his PhD at his alma mater, UNC, University of North Carolina. There, he also defended his dissertation on intellectual courage in the face of moral disagreement. He has published many articles on the intersection of ethics and epistemology, for instance, on topics regarding moral realism, whether morality is invented or discovered, and so many others. This man is so good at what he does that if you go on and read my professor, one of his former students at UNC said this: after Michael Jordan, Eric Sampson is the GOAT at UNC. So I hope that after this conversation, you're able to realize how special this man truly is. So without further ado, Professor Eric Sampson, welcome to the Octagon of Reason.
Thanks so much, Kelton. It's my pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for being here. You know how much I appreciate your work and appreciate the conversations, office hours and all that. So it's a pleasure to finally be able to translate that into the Octagon of Reason, right? So before we start delving into moral realism and all the fun stuff, I kind of want to reverse engineer your life, right? I want to know how far or close was 16-year-old Eric Sampson from, teaching about ethics and epistemology and all that. So who were you at age 16, 17, or 18 years old?
Yeah, so in high school, so I'm from Nashville, Tennessee, actually north of Nashville, about 30 minutes, a little town called Goodlettsville, which nobody's ever heard of. So I was not an academic at all. I wasn't really interested in academic things. I did finish 6th in my class in high school, which was pretty good for me at the time, but it wasn't because I was intrinsically interested in these matters. It was because I was competitive and I had friends who were pretty smart and I just wanted to beat them. Mm-hmm. So that's really the only thing that drove me to be interested in academic things. I never read a full book that wasn't a children's book until after I graduated high school. To the degree that I read books in high school, I did it, just sort of skimming or reading the Spark Notes or something like that. So I remember having this thought, like, look, the people who read books for fun, those are people who are bad at sports. And that's the only reason that they sit around. The people who are actually good at sports are actually playing sports. They're not going around reading and, talking about ideas. So that I reject that idea now, but that was my attitude towards academic things at the time. And then when I was a freshman in college, I had this guy who, for reasons totally unknown to me, took an interest in me, asked me to hang out with him. And he was a reader and we talked about ideas and stuff. And I, began to sort of open up to the idea of reading, began to read myself, got into it, and eventually started taking philosophy classes, got hooked on philosophy, and eventually, long story short, got a PhD in philosophy.
Yeah, and here we are.
Yeah, here we
So
are.
so let me get this straight. So going into college, you didn't want to major in philosophy whatsoever. So that's something that happened,
No.
already in college.
Yeah, that's right. I was a secondary ed major, and then and also sort of double majoring at first in history. Thought I wanted to be a history teacher and a basketball coach. Then
Yeah.
eventually switched to economics to be an economics teacher. And then just right towards the end, probably my senior year, I switched to philosophy. Thought I might go to seminary, and thought, look, I can do that if I want to. And then like the very last semester of college, I thought, no, I want to go to grad school in philosophy. By then, it was too late to apply to grad schools. So I took a job in Nashville working for this organization, this camp organization. It was like a Christian camp organization.
Mm-hmm.
Worked for them over the full year that I took a year off and was applying to grad schools, and then eventually went to grad school. But I didn't make a call that I wanted to major in philosophy until the second semester of my senior year of college, which was super late. The whole time thinking I'd be a basketball coach, maybe go to seminary. I was really kind of directionless, not because I wasn't thinking carefully about it. I just didn't know what I wanted to do and what I was good at.
Mm-hmm. So I noticed a common denominator there, right? Although you say that you were kind of directionless, right? It seems to me that being a teacher was always a part of the plan, right? Being a basketball coach, which is, teaching in a way, right? Or then you moved on to economics and you were thinking about being an economics teacher, and then you're now a philosophy teacher. So what is it about being a teacher that seems to, seems to have excited you so much back then and still now, actually?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I wish I knew. I wish I could
Yeah.
get inside my own head. I mean, I think what sort of common to all those things is what you do when you teach or coach or any of those things. You sort of investigate some domain, something that's going on out there, and you try to boil it down to some principles, which you can then sort of pass on to other people to sort of gain an understanding of what's going on. There's also a little bit of strategy going on and a little bit of sort of trying to see how you can sort of push the boundaries to be even better, both in the academic world and in the sports world. So maybe that's what was going on. I think maybe part of it too is just competitiveness. So like, in philosophy, a lot of it is sort of competitive. Here I am in the Octagon of reason.
Yeah.
I mean, there's like this sort of like back and forth of ideas, which one has the better ideas, and they're sort of like competing against each other. I think competition is definitely something that sort of I find interesting and attractive about both, about all these domains.
So you've always been a competitive person, I assume, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. So I was sort of like all in on sports when I was a kid. I played a ton of baseball, a ton of basketball, basically from the time I was 5 till the time I was probably 19 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Played a ton of intramurals in college, played basketball with a bunch of grad student friends in grad school. Haven't played as much recently because, the older you get, the fewer people that actually continue to play basketball. So, but, I'm always looking to play.
What do you think is the difference between the competitiveness aspects on the courts and in the philosophy field? How were you able to translate your competitiveness from the court to philosophy, and how different it is?
Yeah, it is different. So a lot of competitiveness is actually discouraged in philosophy. It's thought to be mean.
That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, and I actually never held. I mean, I don't think that's correct, but so yeah, I mean, I definitely had to soften up a little bit from moving to basketball to the academic domain. But I mean, one thing that sort of stuck with me was this idea that like the people who work the hardest are often the ones who succeed. It's not always the person who's like the most naturally talented that succeeds the most on a basketball court. So actually in high school, I mean, my team won like 32 games, which is like the most in our school's history. We were a bunch of not especially athletic dudes, but we were really well coached and we were really fundamentally sound and we just worked really hard. Yeah. And so, that was just to say, like, I had sort of already had like a long history of thinking, look, the person who works the hardest is going to win. And so that's sort of something I did in grad school. I sort of said, look, I'm going to outwork these people. Like, but a lot of them are almost certainly more naturally intelligent than me. They almost certainly have better educations than me. I went to the University of Tennessee, perfectly fine education, but not like exceptional. Yeah. I told you in high school, I was not reading like books. I wasn't reading philosophy. I wasn't thinking about philosophy. I wasn't thinking about ideas. I was just playing basketball. Yeah. So I just thought, look, when I go to grad school, I'm just going to try to outwork these people. And that's what I tried to do. I mean, I don't know if I outworked all of them, but
for the most part. Yeah. Would you say for the most, like most of them at least?
Yeah, I think I took it more seriously than a lot of people did, and that helped me.
How do you reconcile your competitiveness and as a philosophy teacher, as a philosophy professor, with the necessity of, getting to the bottom of things, actually arriving at the truth of things?
Yeah. So, I mean, certainly the desire to win can be abused, right? Because you could
Yeah.
just like sort of appeal to rhetoric rather than like good reasons to
Mhm.
try to win. And so the way I conceive of winning is not so much as like, winning a debate where everybody's convinced that I'm smarter or better or something like that. But instead, sort of like this natural like tension between or this natural like give and take like oh, here's like a thing that is a problem for your view, can you deal with it, and sort of like, oh man, I need to go back and think about it, and like, oh, I have a defense against that. And I mean, even like the back and forth is sort of characterized as attacks or objections or defenses or these sorts of like kind of battle and martial artsy kind of words. um so, I mean, why is that? I don't know if I have a deep explanation, but I certainly understand why, like, the desire to win, if winning is conceived as like being perceived as smartest, or winning the debate as in like, I don't know, whatever. I don't know what it is to win a debate. Maybe come off as like the most rhetorically skilled or something like that.
Mhm.
That can be a mistake, because what you're interested in, insofar as you're doing philosophy, is you are trying to get at the truth. But one way to get at the truth is to really like think very carefully and hard, and it often requires like some motivation to get the very best version of the view, and that requires a little bit of motivation and like desire not to lose. And lose here can lose here can construed as like not show that one's view is indefensible in the end.
Mm.
So yeah, there's certainly ways to abuse the whole like desire to win stuff. And also another sense in which I meant competition was just like getting papers out there and getting them accepted in in journals and that sort of thing. That's another way to compete with your fellow grad students. That is sort of, it's actually not entirely truth based, it's more like prestige based. And so I don't claim that like all of these motivations are like great motivations, but I just claim that as a matter of fact I was motivated by these sorts of considerations: getting things published, getting a job, getting all the that sort of stuff.
Mhm. Would you say you've become more competitive as time, went by, or you're sort of, becoming more lenient and more just relaxed and just more nonchalant with life and all that?
Yeah, definitely less competitive, but
Okay.
that's only because the competitiveness was like through like really high. And so, I mean, I'd still say I'm probably more competitive than a lot of people. And maybe that's a bad thing, but in any case, that's the way it is. I'm not saying it is. Maybe it is. Maybe it's
Okay.
not.
I kind of want to
Yeah.
explore that though, because like, why would it be a bad thing? Like, I'm asking this as a competitive individual myself, right? And obviously, I wrestle with this question: like, am I being overly competitive? Is this a bad thing? Is it bad that I'm trying to, be the best in class, right? Because I can get an A, and you can get an A. Everybody can get an A, right? So we all win, right? So what exactly does it mean to be competitive within an environment where everybody can, at least from a statistical standpoint, can win? Everybody can get an A. So what does it mean? What does it mean to be competitive here, right? So I ask myself those questions. Doesn't mean I've become less competitive. As a matter of fact, I think I've become more competitive with time. But I still ask myself those questions because mainly because I think, and please, I want to hear from you. There's something about competition that always makes us ask if it is too much, or like, am I doing too much right now? Like, is there some sort of cap on how competitive one can be?
Yeah, I think this actually, you're asking me this sort of gets me like a good sense of why competitiveness can often be excellent.
Mhm.
Uh, and that's because it can be good because it brings out excellence in someone. And if the reason you're being competitive is because you want to be the very best version of yourself, or you want to find the very best version of some view, or you want to find the best argument for some claim, this sort of competition brings out excellence. And that's what's great about it. This is what's cool about sports competitions in general. Like, you want to see the best out there because it gets the best out of them. And then like, boom, there's excellence. And there's something wonderful about watching excellence. Similarly, this is why, competition in the market is supposed to be such a good thing. It gets the best out of these producers of this particular good. They have to innovate. They have to get their prices down. They have to advertise well. They have to, listen to their customers and tweak their product in light of their customer feedback, right? It brings out excellence.
Mhm.
And so if that's what motivates you to be competitive, I think that's great and is not to be discouraged. There's a kind of competitiveness that's motivated just by status or just by domination of another person, where the domination is the point, is the thing you're going after, rather than the excellence. And I think that's where it can get distorted. This good thing can sort of go awry if the thing that you're supposed to be aiming at, the thing that's worthy of aiming at, excellence, is sort of set aside for other things that are less worthy, things like domination or status, money, those sorts of things. I mean, not that money's bad, but if that's all you're doing, if you're sort of distorting the point of the activity, which is like to get excellence or to get to the truth, then this sort of going after money rather than the thing you're supposed to be achieving is a bad thing.
So you could say that you could be a person that aims to get to the bottom of things, aims to get to the true things, and still be a competitive person. Like those two things are not mutually exclusive. You can be both, and as a matter of fact, one could even argue that because you are both, then because you are competitive, as in you're aiming for excellence, you're aiming to be the best possible version of yourself, then you're going to be more inclined to actually get to the truth, because that means that you've achieved the highest goal possible. Getting to the truth is, the highest goal one can achieve at any particular field. So you can make the argument that by being both, you become the best version of yourself at the end of the day.
Yeah, excellent inquiry ends with like getting good, getting the truth or getting understanding or getting justified belief, sort of like that's what excellence in inquiry consists in. And so very often that's achieved by sort of having the best mind sort of more or less duke it out in the interest of both of us getting to the truth. We can both benefit. This is actually another thing that a lot of people say about competition. Everybody benefits by competition. Both members in the competition benefit because they bring the excellence out in themselves. That happens on the basketball court. That happens in the market. That happens in academia, I think.
Great. I think that's a good segue to my one of my points, but I think I'm gonna just bring it up right now, because you're saying that everybody benefits from competition, right? So one thing you do a lot in class, right? And I appreciate you, and I'm going to talk about this further down the line, but I kind of try to model the Octagon of reason off of what you do in class, right? So you put up a claim, right? And then you think about a potential objection to it, right? We're not talking about just a mere objection to it, like the best possible objection to your claim. But then you think about an objection to the objection, right? But after that, you go on to think about the objection to the objection to the objection of the objection to further strengthen your claim, right? So right now, you just said that competition brings out the best in people, of everyone. Well, to that, one could fairly ask, how does it bring out the best in everybody if not everybody gets the chance to actually win? A question, a debate that has been going on for centuries, right? And it's a big one in academia. I think I'm in that era of my life where this is like the debate is mostly predominant, right? When we talk about capitalism, for instance, right? The market just said that, competition brings out the best of people in the market as well. People look at capitalism as a zero-sum game, right? You can either win or lose, right? If I win, that means that somebody, had to lose. And if I lose, that means that somebody else won, right? Mm-hmm. So how would you, deal with that situation? How would you respond to that?
Yeah. Great question. So I certainly wouldn't want to say that competition always is great for everyone. I want to say in general, it's good for everyone. So, I mean, competition, a lot of people get excluded. So like there's only a certain number of people who can play in the NBA. That's because the competition is so fierce. There's so many excellent basketball players. Not everybody can get in the NBA, but so who benefits from all these excellent players and all this great competition? The fans, the viewers benefit. And also the people who actually get into the NBA, the best of them is brought out by playing against excellent players. But certainly I wouldn't want to say everybody benefits. In the market, who benefits from all that competition? For the most part, it's going to be consumers. Consumers get all these excellent goods that the suppliers have been incentivized to create the very best version of this product that they can get. And they got to get those prices low because it has to be a product that people are willing to buy. So basically what this competition does is it gets a lot of people to use their ingenuity to get to consumers cheap, excellent goods. And who benefits from that? It's the consumers who get to, pay for those things, who get to, buy cheap goods that at a price, that they're willing to pay. And it's products that they can use. So now you're right that the people who lose on that, like when Amazon comes in and provides a product better than some mom and pop shop loses. That's true. And it would be foolish to say like everybody wins. Of course, the mom and pop shop loses. Mm-hmm. But socially, there's a gain here. Why is that? Well, because mom and pop the reason they went out of business is because people weren't frequenting their stores. It's not as though Amazon wouldn't beat them up or something like that. It's just people stopped buying their product. Why did they stop buying their product? Well, because it's better served elsewhere. That means that mom and pop are wasting their labor and wasting their resources by trying to provide a good that Amazon can provide much better. So Amazon should provide it and not mom and pop. Of course, that's very sad for mom and pop, but what are we supposed to do? Waste resources, trying to prop up mom and pop. Mom and pop can, for the most part, go do something else. Now, look, I mean, that sounds bad. Everybody's like, oh no. But the question is, do you have a better alternative? If the alternative is, no, we need more waste because we feel bad about the fact that some people are going to lose, I just submit to you that in the aggregate, that's going to be terrible for society. That any economic system is going to have winners and losers in some spots. The question we want to ask is, what's going to be the most beneficial, all things considered? We don't really have a choice between the most perfect economic system that's ever existed, the one that has zero problems. We have a bunch of possibilities. Each has their own problems. Which one is the best?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, my own view is capitalism is the best.
So you say capitalism is the best, right? By the way, that was a perfect answer. Like the whole time I was like, this makes so much sense, right? But on the other side of it, when you look at it, when you talk about capitalism in academia, you've been in academia, I mean, your entire life is in academia, essentially, right? In a way, your professional life is in academia. So it seems to me that view, or at least that accurate understanding of capitalism is not very popular in academia, at least, in my age group, right? When I look around, when I have conversations in class and out of class, capitalism is not very popular. As a matter of fact, it's frowned upon, right? Mm-hmm. So why do you think that is? Because for me, it is one thing to try to debunk the real idea of a particular thing than to try to debunk a false idea of it. Does it make sense? Mm-hmm. So, like, why do you think that is? Based on your observation, if you have observed the same thing as I have, right? Why do you think that is? Why do you think capitalism is not very is very frowned upon, and especially in my opinion, in amongst my generation, my peers?
Yeah, so there's going to be lots of different answers for this. I mean, I think in your particular case, you're at Rhodes College, which is a liberal arts institution, and so the liberal arts sort of play a big role. And the humanities disciplines are much more likely to be critical of capitalism than, say, like business or economics or computer science, physics or biology. They're, for the most part, not like, throwing stones at capitalism. It's these sort of like, humanities disciplines. Why is that? Well, I think the humanities disciplines sort of, quite frankly, aren't good at doing these sorts of comparisons, like institutional comparisons. For the most part, what they throw at capitalism are criticisms. They point out ways that it's non-ideal. They say, look, this is a problem with capitalism. It looks like, sometimes people lose their jobs, or they don't have the kind of security that they would like, or they have to specialize. And so they have to, spend most of their time doing one job when they would like to do lots of other jobs. And that's all true. I mean, I wouldn't want to say that, that's false. There's no specialization of labor under capitalism. Of course there is. Now, the question is there a better alternative? And in order to assess alternatives, you have to have some knowledge of how economics is. You also have to, of alternative economic institutions and what the pros and cons of those would be. You have to have some understanding of, well, why does capitalism run the way it does now? You have to have some understanding of what entrepreneurs do, why they're organized in firms, why government intervention can be pro-social, but it can also be harmful in various ways. In other words, it requires lots of specialized knowledge about economics that many people in the humanities just don't have. And so all they can see is like, I see all these problems. It seems like it could be better, but you'll just notice they often just lob criticisms at capitalism. They don't offer alternatives that are supposed to be better. And that's because they have no idea how to organize a society or how to organize an economy. So why is it that you see people in your generation have these sorts of criticism of capitalism? I think it's because they see problems with capitalism, and but they have no sense of what a better alternative would be. But they don't really think that that's super interesting. They just think, as long as I can see a problem, that settles it. My own view is, no, that doesn't settle it, because we want to know, is your alternative way of doing things better than capitalism? I don't claim capitalism has no problems. I claim it's the best thing that we have available.
So it's the best we have available. It's not perfect, but it's the best amongst every other alternative, essentially.
That's right. Yeah. And I would say the same thing about democracy. I would say, look, are there criticisms of democracy? Of course, I have criticisms of democracy all day long. But do I think we have a better alternative? The answer is no. So I'm happy to lob criticisms at democracy all day long. For instance, here's just a classic problem for democracy that Plato talked about like a billion years ago, like in 400 BC. Basically, the problem is this: look, if something is really, really important and it's important to get it right, who do you go to? Do you go to the people who know what they're talking about, or do you just ask anybody for their opinion and let them all contribute? Because we're all equally important. Plato famously says, no, you go to the people who know what they're talking about. If you want to become an excellent wrestler, you go to the wrestling coach. You don't take a vote on what you should do. If you have surgery, you go to the surgeon. You don't take a vote on how to proceed with your surgery. Okay, so But what do you do in a democracy? You basically ask everybody for their opinion on this thing. That is a really bad way to go. Okay, that's a classic criticism of democracy. I think it's correct. I think democracy is deficient insofar as it asks everybody to make a contribution to this thing, even if they have no knowledge about how to run it well. Nevertheless, I think that we should still be a democracy. Why is that? Because we don't have any better alternatives. Okay. So what just happened there? I just threw a criticism at democracy. I have tons more. Ask me and I'll be happy to give it to you.
No.
And nevertheless, I think this is the best we can do. So my recommendation isn't that we abolish democracy, even though I have tons of criticisms of it. It's we keep it and let's be on the lookout for better alternatives. But if I don't have a better institution or a better way of running things, I'm not going to scrap the thing we have. And also, I mean, there's just the whole time we should be making comparisons. When people criticize capitalism, you should always ask, do you have something better? If the answer is no, then it's not time to abolish capitalism just yet. We don't have anything to go to. It would be irresponsible to burn down this thing that has brought about what is the most materially prosperous generation in the history of the world. No civilization in the history of humanity has done better economically than what we currently have. And people want to burn down the system. Listen, I'm not like wedded to capitalism. If there's a better system, I'm happy to go to it. I'm just telling you, we don't have that now. And it's super irresponsible for people to say, burn down capitalism or to attribute all of society's problems to capitalism when we are among the most successful economically generations that has ever existed.
Yeah. That's beautifully put, right? As you know, I'm from Mozambique, right? So for those of you who are listening to this podcast or watching us on YouTube, Mozambique is a country in Southeast Africa. And Mozambique was colonized by the Portuguese. We gained our independence in 1975. Soon after independence, we adopted a Marxist-Leninist, political system, right? So for the most part, the idea behind the adoption of a Marxist-Leninist system was because African countries equated colonialism to capitalism. Mm-hmm. So now, having that in mind, considering the fact that my country, for instance, we were under Portuguese rule for 500 years up until 1975, right? So those are 5 centuries right there. You do the math. How many generations are there, right? And the same happens to so many other African countries, right? How do you go down to Mozambique and preach the gospel of capitalism to them? How do you go to them and be like, you know what? This right here is the best thing happening. Whether you are in a country like the USA that has had a 200 plus year run on capitalism or a newly independent country, capitalism is the way to go. What do you say to them?
Yeah, so I would separate 2 things: capitalism and colonialism. It's unclear why would colonialism and capitalism be inextricably linked? It seems like you could be a colonialist country, you could go make colonies without having capitalism. So I mean, when does capitalism really get kicked off? It's roughly around the 1800s. Well, I mean, the Europeans had already begun colonizing to a significant degree well before that. So it's not as though capitalism explains why they're colonialists. Colonialism was an idea that people have had forever. It's basically just taking your people, going elsewhere and putting guns or swords in their face and then making them do things. That's slavery. I mean, people have done that. Slavery has existed for as long as human beings have been alive. So the idea of going to another place, trying to dominate it and trying to extract resources from them is way older than capitalism by thousands of years. So the suggestion that capitalism just is colonialism, I think is a mistake. Mm-hmm. The other thing is, you asked me, and actually your comments sort of reminded me of this thought. Why is it that my generation and people in the humanities are sort of, so critical of capitalism? I think it's because the sort of rhetoric that comes out of communists or more socialist people, it sounds so good. We're going to end oppression. We're going to bring equality for all. We're going to basically bring this utopia, or we're going to really do the good stuff. So what would I say to Mozambique, where I go down there and they say, doesn't that sound good? Eric, do you hate equality? Do you hate freedom from oppression? I would just say, go look around at the places where people saying those sorts of things. Go look at what's actually happened. Okay, on the one hand, listen to their words, but then go look at what really happened. And what I want to suggest to you, Mozambique or any other country that's critical of capitalism, is go look at what really happens when people start saying those words rather than the words that come out of their mouth. That's going to give you a better indication of how things turn out. Because I agree that socialism sounds way better. And I think that's also why college students are convinced that socialism is obviously better than capitalism. How on earth could you think that profit seeking is the way to organize? Profits, oh my gosh, getting more resources out than you put in, that's a disaster, morally speaking. I think that's why, I mean, profit seeking just sounds way less important than equality for all, freedom from oppression. You know, yeah, that's another thing, is that I think capitalism's sort of rhetoric is more realistic, but less, you know, it doesn't win the standoff with communism for sure. I would just like to point out too that it looks like for the most part, it's the capitalist countries that have, one, ended colonialism. For the most part, decolonialism happened as capitalism kicked off. Why is that? That's because they realized, hey, the way to produce resource and produce wealth is through economic activity that doesn't involve, you know, capturing people and sending soldiers down there to like continually smack them with whips and things like that. So as capitalism gets more and more advanced, colonialism goes away more and more and more. And what it would explain that? Well, it seems like it can't be that capitalism is just inextricably linked with colonialism. Why is it that colonialism is dying as capitalism is getting bigger and bigger? So yeah, that's another thing to say.
I kind of want to jump to something that has been, you know, very tied to your work, right? Moral realism, right? What would be your concise definition of moral realism? What is moral realism?
Yeah, moral realism is the view that there are things that are right and wrong. Some acts are right, some acts are wrong, and what makes those acts right or wrong is not dependent on our attitudes. So the reason it's wrong to murder isn't because people around here disapprove of murder. It would be wrong to murder even if everybody around here approved of it. It's not wrong to murder because the government like passed a law that said it's wrong to murder. It would be wrong even if there were no laws against murder. In other words, there's no group of people whose attitudes or whose judgments or whose commands or whose approvals or disapprovals makes it wrong or right to do something. The idea is that there are truths independent of anyone's attitudes, independent of any culture, about what's right or wrong. Now, this view, of course, recognizes that, look, lots of different people have lots of different views about what's right or wrong. Lots of different cultures have different views. Of course, everybody recognizes that. But the thought is, yeah, some people are wrong, just as that lots of people have different beliefs about what shape the earth is in, or what the world, about what the physical reality is like. There's lots of different views about that stuff. Are there aliens? Do vaccines cause autism? Lots of other beliefs like that. People disagree. All the same, there's a truth about it, independent of anyone's attitudes. And so what sets the truths about whether vaccines cause autism? Reality sets the truth. Nobody makes it the case that vaccines cause or don't cause autism. Reality makes it the case. The same thing is true with morality. What makes it the case that murder is wrong? It's true independent of anyone's attitudes. It's wrong in the way that 2 + 2 = 4 is 4. No one decided that 2 + 2 is 4. It's true independently of anyone's attitudes. We discovered that 2 + 2 is 4. Similarly, we discovered that murder is wrong.
So essentially, moral realism answers the question whether morality is discovered or created, and its answer is that it's the former. Morality is discovered, right?
That's right.
I kind of want to push back, right, to the idea of moral realism, because in the most recent episode I published, I try to answer the question whether morality was objective or subjective, right? And my answer was that morality must be objective, right? And reality shows that, you know, throughout history, with you know, although we have different cultures, different backgrounds, we seem for the most part to be in line in regards to what we consider to be moral and immoral, right? But still, there are some people that might come to you and be like, hey, Professor Eric, okay, I see what you're saying, but I think that reality is only the byproduct of what people make it to be, right? So when you say that reality is what defines or whether something is right or wrong or moral or immoral, I don't agree with you, because if you look at it in Nazi Germany, the reality made it to be that, you know, killing Jews and persecuting them was right. That was their reality, right? And when you look at, you know, northern Mozambique, when you look at the terrorist attacks and people suffering there, the reason why that's taking place is because the terrorists believe that, you know, there is a better way to organize society than the way the current Mozambican society seems to be organized, right? That is their reality, and they're there sort of, you know, trying to establish their moral view onto other people. If you ask them, they're going to say, okay, this is what is right. So that's their reality, therefore, which is only a byproduct of, you know, whatever they make it to be. So what would you say to them?
I would say that characterization of the way the moral truths are sort of misunderstands or conflates two things. One, what reality is and people's beliefs about reality. So the Nazis, of course, everybody knows that the Nazis believed that killing Jews was a good thing. But that doesn't mean that in the reality it was permissible to kill Jews. It just means they believed that in reality it was permissible to kill Jews. So I just deny that it was true in their reality that it's permissible to kill Jews. They believed that in their reality it was permissible to kill Jews. And similarly with the point about northern Mozambique, those people just had false beliefs about morality. So yeah, I mean, what my suggestion isn't that like people's beliefs about morality are perfect or anything like that. People have false beliefs about what moral reality is like all the time. Nevertheless, there is a reality that's independent of their beliefs about that reality that sets the truths. And what we want and what our job is as moral agents is to get our beliefs to match up with reality. It's not as though our beliefs make the reality, at least on my view.
So, the way I see it, right, based on what you're saying, it seems to me that you're not merely comparing one reality to another. You're comparing, all realities against a super reality, right? In a way,
Yeah.
that seems to me my understanding of what you're saying, in the sense of who's to say whose reality is better than the other?
So I wouldn't say that each of us has our own reality.
Okay.
I would say each of us has our own beliefs. And what those beliefs are trying to do is match reality. There's one reality. That is, there's one way the world is. The world is only one way. And what we're doing when we're forming beliefs is trying to represent the way that reality is correctly. In other words, what we want to do is we want to get it right because there's only one way that things can be. And of course, in our attempts to get it right, to represent the way the world is, we can miss and we can disagree. That is, I can think that the world is a certain way. You could think that a world is a certain way that's different than that. At least one of us is wrong because there's only one way that things could be. Okay, so you asked me, but don't we each have our own reality? So there's like a super reality? No. We don't each have, there's one reality. We all have it in the sense that like we're all part of it. We're all living in it. And what we're trying to do when we form beliefs is represent it accurately.
Okay.
I don't know if that makes contact with your question, but that's a way to. Yeah.
Because to that, one could fairly ask you, who's to say that there's only one way? Who's to say that there's only one way the world is? Who is the one who made it to be the way it is, essentially?
Yeah. I don't know. Like, who makes it the case that there are 8 planets, or who makes it the case that the world, that the Earth goes around the sun? No one makes it the case. I don't make it the case. Now I believe that the Earth goes around the sun, but that's because reality is that way. And I have good evidence suggesting that. Now, is it possible I'm wrong about that? For sure. But in any case, whatever the truth about the Earth and the sun is, maybe which one goes around which, that's set by nobody. It's not as though scientists decided one day, hey, I think we'd like it if the Earth goes around the sun. No, they discovered that the Earth goes around the sun. Okay. So that point is just to say, we all recognize that there are some truths that don't depend on us at all, that we're trying to discover. Okay. Mm-hmm. So we all have to deal with that. Rhodes College is in Memphis, Tennessee. Who makes it the case that Rhodes College is in Tennessee? Well, I mean, maybe the builders originally, but now that it's there, nobody. It's up to no one. We could all form the belief that Rhodes College is in Massachusetts. We'd all be wrong because there's a truth about where Rhodes College is, independent of anyone's attitudes. Okay, so we're all committed to those kinds of truths. My claim is just, and morality is like that. It's crucially unlike, say, for instance, whether it's Tuesday. What makes it the case that today's Monday. Today's Monday. Makes it the case that today is Monday? Well, we all decided. Is there an objective fact, sort of like written into the universe fact about whether it's Monday? Nope. We just decide it's Monday. What if tomorrow we all decided that we're going to have 12 days of the week, and the next day is, Odin's Day? Mm-hmm. I don't know. That's just So tomorrow's Odin's Day. We all decided it. Would that make it Odin's Day? Yes, it would, because we just make the truths about what day of the week it is. But my claim, at least, we don't make it the case that the Earth goes around the sun. We don't make it the case that 2 + 2 = 4, and we don't make it the case that murder is wrong. we do make it the case that the 3-point line is, gives you 3 points.
Mhm.
Could have gave you 4. We could have said this line right here, if you score from behind it, gets you 4 points.
Okay.
We could make it that way. That's the product of our invention, not our discovery. But these kinds of truths that I'm describing are the kinds that are.
Okay. So I would say that there's a difference between, yes, you just said that, we discovered that it is the Earth and every other planet that goes around the sun, not the other way around, right?
Yeah.
And we discovered that at some point we thought that no, it was, it is the sun that goes around the Earth, right? But then we finally discovered that actually, it's the Earth and every other planet that goes around the sun. But there was something that led us to that, to that truth, right? So in science, we have different scientific apparatus that, that allow us to get to the bottom of things, that allow us to get to the truth of the matter, right? What is the instrument used, if there's any, to realize the truth of morality?
Yeah, this is the method of moral inquiry. So basically, here's how moral inquiry goes. That is, how do you discover what the moral truths are? You begin with paradigm cases. That is like pretty easy cases about rightness and wrongness. So suppose I, take a cat and I begin to just dissect them right here on the podcast here. Would that be morally permissible? It seems like that's a textbook case of no, it's not okay to just start torturing cats just to make a philosophical point. Suppose I am out of reading light. I need some light. And so I take another person and I begin to burn them because I just want to read better. So I'm burning a person alive for the reading light that it provides. That looks like a textbook case of something that's morally wrong. Okay. So you begin with a bunch of cases that seem intuitively correct to you about the nature of rightness and wrongness. And then you begin to try to formulate general principles that would explain why all those things are right, while the clear actions are clearly right and the clear actions that are wrong are clearly wrong. And then you sort of go back and you sort of ask, okay, does that general principle make sense of lots of other intuitive cases? And so you begin reasoning about cases and reasoning about general principles. This is called the method of reflective equilibrium. Mm-hmm. But in short, basically what you're doing is philosophy. This is why if you take an ethics class, you take a philosophy of law class or political philosophy class, it's going to appeal to lots of particular cases. And the point of those cases, of these thought experiments, as it were, so they're often called, is to see if they comport with our general judgments about general principles. And what we're trying to do is formulate general principles about the nature of rightness and wrongness. And you sort of go back and do that. So what are we doing here? We're doing rational reflection. That's another thing that you might call it. But in other words, you're reasoning and you're arguing and you're slowly but surely trying to figure it out by considering the costs and benefits of various views. And it's hard. And a lot of people don't want to do it. And so they throw up their hands and they say, there's no truth about this. What I want to suggest to them is, look, if you don't want to do the hard work, that's fine. But you can't just by seeing that it's a very difficult task, show that it's, that's a BS way of trying to figure it out or something like that.
Bertrand Russell, a philosopher, he was, very fond of the idea of moral relativism, and he said that what we regard as, morals are just an expression of individual taste, right? So at the end of the day, just as much as you like, chocolate cake or vanilla ice cream, you can, decide to like kindness more than, murdering somebody. Does it make sense? At the end of the day, it's just a reflection of personal taste and just preferences and nothing more than that, right? Mm-hmm. Nonetheless, when asked if we could, live in a way that society regards as immoral, it doesn't feel that it would be able to live in that particular way. Right. Mm-hmm. So it seems to me that even though there are people out there who are very smart, incredibly intelligent in their fields and all that, who are advocates of moral relativism, right? For the most part, they can't even entertain the idea of they themselves, living in a way that is considered to be immoral, right? Yeah. So apart from the moral inquiry instrument that we have at our disposal, it seems to me that there's something inside of us, like a moral compass, that tells us whether something is right or whether something is wrong, right? And it seems to me that, if you look at the entire, animal kingdom, as in, human beings included, right? We are the only ones who have that, right? A lion doesn't, sit around and just think about how, he killed a gazelle, and that gazelle had a family, had kids and all that. It doesn't feel bad about that. It just, sleeps and wakes up and does the exact same thing the next day, right? Mm-hmm. So why do we have that, Like, because to some extent, it's a burden apparently upon human beings. So why us? Why do we have that? Where does that come from?
Yeah, so I think why do we have this capacity rather than others? I think I mean, one story is something like an evolutionary story, according to which like we just became, because it's evolutionarily advantageous, we became the kinds of creatures who can reason. That is, we can think about possibilities and necessities, and we can think about mathematics, and we can think about these sorts of things. Now, of course, evolution isn't really interested in higher order mathematics, but nevertheless, we can use this thing that evolution gave us, which is our brains, to reason about higher order mathematics or physics or biology or anthropology or philosophy. So why do we have that? Why are we the kinds of creatures who can think about rightness and wrongness? Because we have this really cool thing, our brains, that's capable of rational reflection. You might also think that like God gave us this brain because he wants us to learn how to live well. And so, whatever, there are many things you could say, but in any case, it has something to do with our intelligence, with our ability to reason. If I could just make one comment about your point about not being able to live up to one's relativism, I just want to point out that one thing that a lot of people are happy to say in academia, undergrads, but even some academics, they're happy to say like, oh, look, there's no, uniquely correct truth about morality. Nevertheless, they're happy to be pretty moralistic. That is to make claims about like, how bad racism is, or about how bad colonialism is, or about how evil capitalism is, or about how you shouldn't say that, other cultures can be wrong. That's intolerant. They are happy to moralize in all sorts of different ways. But if that's merely the expression of your attitudes, then I could always ask, well, why should I care about that? If that's what you care about, that's not what I care about. I love racism. I love colonialism. I love capitalism. I love crushing the weak.
Mm-hmm.
So what that you don't like it, if that's all you're doing when you make a moral claim is just expressing your, likes and dislikes, or your beliefs, or your, just the values that you happen to have, there's absolutely no reason for me to care about those things. What I want to suggest is that when people make these claims like capitalism is evil or racism is evil, they're trying to describe a world independent of their attitudes. They're saying, not only do I like these things, but you should like them too. And you should like them or dislike them in the way that I do, because it's correct to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And that insofar as you don't share the values that I have, you're missing something important. And that's because there's a truth independent of me. I'm not merely expressing my attitudes. I'm trying to describe a reality that's independent of them. Mm-hmm. Because otherwise, when you tell me capitalism is evil, that's merely an expression of your attitudes. I could say, don't care. I have what I care about is crushing the weak and capitalism and killing people and all that kind of stuff. So what I want to suggest is, many people who think they're on team relativism or team like, there's no objective truth about morality. No, they're implicitly committed to moral realism, and they're inconsistent insofar as they don't see the conflict in the ways that they live and the ways that they think and the views that they express externally.
By the way, I'll make sure to cut, and clip that specific part. Be like, I love racism. I love to crush the weak. Just post that. Be like, yep, this is Eric Sampson, everybody.
Yeah.
So just to go back a little bit of what you said, right? You presented two ways, sort of two ways to view how human beings are wired, right? Like why human beings are wired, like why are we wired the way we are? You said you can make an argument from an evolution standpoint, right? Or you could even, say that, oh, it's God or something like that, right? You said it yourself, there's only one way, right? So I don't want to, leave this conversation think, oh, there's two ways. So which one is it? Right? What do you think is the way? What do you think, like which argument, although you can make solid argument for both parties, right? Which argument do you think is more reasonable?
Yeah, the reason I offer those is just to say, like, look, on any view that you have, you can agree with me on this, that we have access to these truths. As a matter of fact, I happen to think that actually both of those are right. I think that the way that God gave us our intellectual capacities is by means of evolution. So I think that, God basically oversaw the process by which we came to have these things. He sort of knew what he was doing, and because he's God and he doesn't like get bored or anything like that, he could, stand to take the time for evolution to take its process. Am I certain that that's the way it happened? No, I'm not certain that's the way it happened. For all I know, there's no God, and, it happened just by blindless evolution, or for all I know, God made Adam 6,000 years ago. But my guess is the way it happened is God oversaw the process of evolution to get us to where we are. So actually, I think both could be right. And at the end of the day, I do think both are right. But I sort of hold that view pretty lightly. And I just would advocate that sort of like, you can take that attitude towards lots of intellectual questions. That is, you could say, look, it could have gone this way, it could have gone this way. I'm more confident that this is the correct view, but it's hard to know. The evidence is kind of thin, at least the evidence that favors one over another. So, kind of unsure about it.
I don't want to misrepresent your view here. Are you saying that at the end of the day, you can sort of reverse engineer the idea of morality all the way back to God?
Um, I
So
don't.
whether because you said something like whether he uh, oversaw the evolutionary process of morality, whether he just put Adam and Eve in the
Yeah,
garden, like
yeah.
whatever it was. At the end of the day, it's sort of like he's the one who started it all. Is that what you're saying? I don't want
I
to mix.
do.
Yeah.
I was making a point about how we come to know the moral truth. So that
Okay.
was a point about our cognitive faculties and our ability to know. So that was an epistemic point, a point about how we come to know the moral truths. Now there's a question about, okay, but even if that's how we come to know the moral truths, what makes the moral truths what they are such that we can come to know them?
Hmm.
And there, as a matter of fact, don't think that God, like by his will, at least by like just commanding the moral truth. I don't think that's how the moral truths come about. I think either they're like facts about God's nature, or maybe they're just independent, mind independent, even God independent truths about how rational agents ought to live that God himself lives up to.
Hmm.
At the end of the day, I don't have super subtle views about that, but all I know is that on whatever story we tell, it's going to have to be that nobody invents the truths, not even God. At least on my view, God doesn't invent the truths. That is, he doesn't make it the case that murder is wrong. The reason God commands you not to murder is because it is wrong, and he recognizes that.
Could one make the argument that, based on your view, so say even God himself, in all his mightiness, in all his knowledge and justice and all the wonderful things, he's not the one who sort of sets up morality the way we come to know, right?
Yeah.
So
At
doesn't
least not
that,
by his will, at least
yeah,
not by saying, I now declare that, racism is wrong. I now declare that stealing from people and using their resources for yourself is wrong. I don't think that's what makes it wrong. Stealing isn't wrong because God said, don't steal. The reason God said don't steal is because God knows that it's wrong. And that's why he's commanding you not to do it.
so could you say that it doesn't, so not even God himself created morality? Is that what you're trying to say?
I'm saying I'm a little unsure about like
But
the fundamental
but
thing.
in your
Yeah.
uncertainty, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm
Is
saying it's
that
possible.
where, like, okay, you're saying it's possible? There's a
I'm saying
possibility
it's
there.
possible. Yeah. And if you're wondering like, why on earth would anybody say this? Well, I mean, I take it pretty much everybody who's a theist agrees that God is good.
Mhm.
God is good. What does that mean? What is it for God to be good? Well, on one conception, it means that God lives up to the standards of goodness that he did not himself invent, that they're standards of goodness and he lives up to them. That's why he's good. Here's another thing you could mean, which I'm open to. This might be it. It might mean that when we say God is good, we mean God is identical to the good. That is, he's one and the same. It's not that he lives up to some standards of goodness. Instead, he is like what Plato thought, there's a form of the good. That is, there's such a thing as goodness itself,
Mhm.
and everything else participates in goodness. What does that mean? Very hard to say.
Yeah.
I'm unclear. That's why I'm not super attracted to this idea, but maybe it's true. I mean, I don't know. We're dealing with like the foundations of reality here. So maybe God is identical to the good. And if that's right, then maybe the moral truths sort of somehow spill out of that fact.
Mm.
The way they spill out, though, is very unclear. So what I'm suggesting to you is either of these views could be correct, and I'm unclear on which one is.
Okay. Sir, do you believe in God?
I do. Yeah. Yeah, I do.
Okay. So what would you say is your definition of God? What would the definition of God be?
I don't know if I have a definition, but I can just tell you what I'm talking about when I'm talking about God is this all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good creator of the universe, worthy of worship, that kind of thing.
Mhm. So that seems to me a very sort of Christian view of God, right? Are you a Christian?
Yeah, that's right.
Have you
Yeah.
always been a Christian?
No, I mean, I guess I converted. I mean, so I've always, I mean,
Yeah,
my parents
sort of
took me to,
by always.
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, my parents took me to church and I think when I was like 11 years old, I sort of had a little conversion experience. But since I was 11, yeah, I would say I was a Christian. And in the sense that like I've always gone to church and yeah, since birth, basically, my parents have taken me to church.
So in your in your journey of as a philosopher, as a philosophy teacher, right? Was there ever a point where you found yourself in conflict with your belief, with your Christian belief?
Well, motivationally, yes, in the sense that like I didn't want to live up to the Christian standards. Yeah, I mean, if what you mean is intellectually, like, was there ever a time when I didn't believe in God, or that I would like rejected Christianity? There was maybe a brief moment in my undergrad where like, I wouldn't have said it explicitly, though I was sort of toying with the idea, probably that my senior year. But that was pretty short lived. So for the most part, no. And these days, I'm pretty, comfortable and pretty settled in, being a Christian, and I don't really have doubts. I don't like sit up at night like, oh no, what if it, I don't really worry about it.
Can you recall what sort of settled your resolve? Like what made you realize, and you know what? This is actually the truth.
Yeah, I think to the degree that I was unsettled when I was an undergrad, it was because I thought I was sort of influenced by what was prestigious and what I regarded as like kind of fancy and like, like so that was a time when like the new atheists were a big deal, and there was like a lot of rhetoric and bluster, like, oh my gosh, God is the most stupid thing you could ever believe. And sort of, I was like kind of taken in by that. So it wasn't rational considerations that brought me to that. It was these sort of non-rational, even like kind of vicious, like, but I want to be cool and I want to like be thought, smart and interesting and not stupid. And so I was sort of like, for those sort of non-rational reasons, beginning to have my doubts. But, those sorts of non-rational reasons can often cause you to have cognitive doubts, that is doubts about like to lose belief. And so to the extent that it was really because of those kinds of considerations. It wasn't like, oh, there's this like reason that I now see that I didn't see previously or anything like that. It wasn't that kind of thing.
So that being said, do you think that you can sort of arrive at the truth of God through reason?
Yep. Basically, yeah. And I think people do this all the time. Now, I guess if you're an atheist, you're going to say, no, it's just, people are having, I don't know, they're irrationally, like they want comfort or something like that. But yeah, I do. So there are many arguments for God's existence. I don't claim that those are like, anybody who doubts the existence of God is stupid or irrational or something like that. But I do think, look, these provide good reasons for believing that God exists. So, like fine tuning is an excellent argument. I think the Kalam cosmological argument, I think the contingency argument, there's so many arguments. I think Pascal's wager makes it practically rational for you to at least try to get yourself to believe that God exists. I think there's lots of arguments for the conclusion that God exists that justify believing in God. When I say justify, I don't mean anybody who doubts it is irrational and you're stupid. I just think, no, it makes it rationally permissible for you to believe that God exists. And I think, yeah, okay, that's right. There are tons of arguments like that.
So now, sir, I want you to bear with me, right?
Okay.
So considering all those arguments, right, I would assume that those arguments will, assuming you were an atheist, right, those arguments can take you from being an atheist to a theist, right? But you didn't identify yourself as a theist. You said that you are a Christian, right? So a Muslim is a theist. A Buddhist to a certain extent is a theist, right? And there's so many other religions in the world. Those are, for the most part, theists. They have a belief in an idea of God, right? So how do you go from maybe atheist, theist, and then Christian, bearing in mind that if you then arrive at Christianity as in, okay, this is what God is, then it follows by reason that you have to sort of discredit every other religion there is. Same thing if you're a Muslim, right? And if you look at those religions, specifically, a Muslim believes that there's only one way that leads to Allah, that leads to God. The same can be said about Christians, right? Jesus himself says in John 14:6 that I am the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody can get to the Father except through me. Right, so those are not superficial statements. Those are fundamental statements of big religions in the world, right? So how do you what would you say to that?
Yeah, so why Christianity rather than any other religion?
Exactly.
Yeah, so it looks like the main competitors are going to be Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Why is that? Well, the other ones are sort of Buddhism. I think of as sort of not theist, and it's just sort of like a way to try to think about reality that I suppose it has like some supernatural elements. Hinduism, I guess, I'm just not, it doesn't seem like an open possibility to me. But if you're wondering like why, for instance, Christianity over Islam, here's why not Islam. I think most of it comes from one person, that is Muhammad. So he has to have been a genuine prophet and been genuinely receiving these sorts of messages, and he couldn't have been a fraud. Was he a fraud? Well, I guess I'm inclined to think think that he was. I hope I don't get, in trouble on the internet for this.
No, hopefully not.
Okay. But yeah, why is that? Well, he said a lot of the things that, he said revealed a lot of things in the Quran. But then he went on to kind of do the kinds of things that standard cult leaders do. That is, he went to, led lots of military campaigns to try to conquer lots of things. So he got lots of worldly success and lots of worldly power. He had lots of, he had multiple wives. He had some, used his position to have some sex, which is the kinds of things that lots of cult leaders do. So that's the kind of stuff that sort of like tips me off that, look, this guy has to have nailed it, but it looks like what he's doing is like what a lot of cult leaders do. That is doing the, those sorts of things that I just described. Whereas Christianity and the Jewish tradition have lots of people who are giving revelation. So it's not just like coming through one person. Of course, Jesus is a crucial part of this, but it's not just his testimony. I mean, there's been a long history of people who are saying they're getting revelations from God. Many of these people are telling people uncomfortable truths. That is, that the Jewish prophets are telling the Jewish people, hey, the reason you got conquered is because you guys fell away. You guys sinned. It's your fault. And that's precisely not the kind of thing you would say if you were trying to gain for yourself status and influence and power. You wouldn't like tell the people you're going to that they're responsible for their suffering. They were widely rejected. The Jewish prophets were widely rejected, so not taken on, so they just, as a matter of fact, didn't gain lots of worldly success. People like Jesus also were killed. He didn't, as a matter of fact, like try to set up a big, earthly regime where he had lots of power. He, for the most part, he remained celibate his whole life. So he's not doing the characteristic things that those people do. He also went around to the Jewish leaders and told them that, guys, you are screwing up big time. And so he didn't like try to take power within the Jewish system, and quite the opposite. He tried to say, look, you guys are messing up big. And the people who testified to the resurrection of Jesus were, for the most part, women. The people who followed him were, for the most part, like these not, high status people. So the reason the women sort of testifying to the resurrection of Jesus is important is because that's precisely the kind of thing you wouldn't make up if you were trying to make up a story. You would say, because women were widely discredited at that time, so you would put it in the mouth of somebody very credible if you were going to make it up. And you wouldn't say that the crucial follower of Jesus, Peter, denied Jesus 3 times. If you were just making it up, you would say that Jesus' closest confidant, Peter, like had faith the whole time. He never doubted a thing. The disciples, you would not say, as the Gospels continually do, that these guys didn't understand, that they didn't see what Jesus was on about. You would not present them as incompetent. You would present them as hyper competent. The disciple or the Gospels present them as pretty incompetent. That's precisely what you wouldn't expect if they were just making it up. So it looks like the gospel narratives and all the stuff surrounding Jesus is precisely the kinds of stuff that you would see if you weren't making it up, and it was real. Now, is it possible that these people are still making it up all the same? Yes, of course it's possible. But what we have to deal with in the real world is limited evidence. So given the limited evidence that I have for and against Christianity, it seems to me that it's more likely true than false. So when I say that I'm a Christian, I don't mean that I'm certain. There's no doubt. There's just no way any other view could be true. I'm just saying it's the best supported view, and I have to go with the best supported view I have. That's Christianity as far as I can see.
So to that, one could fairly come to you and be like, hey, hold on a second, professor, right? Are you saying that Muhammad, yes, he did wage war with, every unbeliever he found on his way, and he tried to make them and force them in a way to actually become and submit to the will of Allah. That is true, right? But you can't come here and say that Islam is the only religion in the world that is actually, waged war in the name of God. You can see in the Old Testament, right? God himself commanded the Israelites to wage war against the Canaanites, right? And they overtook their land. What they call the promised land was actually already occupied by a bunch of other people. Right? Even Jesus himself. All right. Let's say that, when he was here on earth, right, he preached the gospel of, of peace and love and just the beauty of God, and then his mightiness and his love and mercy for everybody. But he did say that he will return to wage war against the forces of evil. That sounds a little bit belligerent right there. So why would you not, consider all those important objections against Christianity? What would you say?
Yeah. Great question. Yeah. So the reason I cited the war stuff is to try to say, should we believe this Muhammad guy? So I'm trying to make an epistemic point. Like, how likely is it that this guy was telling the truth? And what I want to suggest is he has all the hallmarks of the kinds of swindlers, religious swindlers that we already know about, the kind of person who would pursue multiple sexual partners and worldly power and success. My criticism of Muhammad wasn't like God would never, engage in violence or never command someone to be violent. That wasn't what I was trying to say. I wasn't saying that's why you shouldn't believe Muhammad. I was trying to say, no, the reason you shouldn't believe Muhammad is because he did the kinds of things that we already know swindlers do. Jesus did precisely not the kinds of things that we know swindlers to do. That is to say, my kingdom is not of this world. I'm not trying to take over this world. Going around saying, hey, you guys know the 10 commandments that you really love? Guess what? They're even harder than that. You've heard it said that you shouldn't murder. I tell you, you shouldn't even be angry with a man. You've heard it said that you shouldn't commit adultery. I tell you that you shouldn't even look lustfully after a woman. He's telling them like really hard things and saying like it's way harder than you would expect. He's like really ramping up the demandingness of the religion in a way that you wouldn't expect if he was a mere swindler. So the point about the violence in Muhammad isn't to say like no religion will ever have any violence involved in it. It's just to say, looks like the leader, the guy who we're supposed to trust, who has got all the revelation. I mean, all of the Quran comes from the revelation of Muhammad. I'm trying to say, it looks like probably he didn't get this revelation, that in fact he was making it up. Or, I mean, there's always this other hypothesis, which is something like a demon and sort of influencing him or something like that. But in any case, it's not a legit person. And that's all I wanted the violence to be doing, not to say, no religion that has violence in it is legit.
So, as I said before, we had Professor Wales here as our first guest, right? And towards the end of the conversation, we were also talking about this whole idea of God and morality and all that. And he said that it's not that he does not believe in the existence of God, but it just stands on the side of reason. And you said here that, well, actually, reason can lead you to God. I was actually reading a book by Joshua Rasmussen where he tries to answer the question, can reason lead to God, right? But the way the conversation went with Professor Wales, it seems to be that I'm more on the side of reason, and the way it was going about is that I need something more than reason to believe in God, right? Some sort of a leap of faith. So we need something more than just reason to lead to God. So would you say that reason stands in opposition to the idea of God?
No, no. I mean, I do think sometimes people like, sort of man on the street kind of religious people think it's about faith, man. And I think that's often because they either don't know or don't want to defend their view intellectually. And they think that it's sort of courageous or it's sort of like, virtuous in some way to just like believe without evidence or something like that. But I mean, we don't believe without evidence in or at least we shouldn't, in basically any other domain of our life. I don't know why religion would be special. It seems like that's actually the most crucial place to get things right, which means that you want to be guided by evidence the most when it comes to religion. So I'm happy to say that faith is an important thing. What is faith? I regard it as something like a commitment to continue on in a path, even in the face of adverse evidence. So the suggestion is look, I'm going to keep going on even when the evidence doesn't look entirely like it supports the view, but that doesn't mean I'm going to do this forever. I mean, if there's just overwhelming evidence that this view is false, I got to abandon it. So I think a lot of us have faith, not only in religions, but a lot of us have faith that we're going to achieve some task that's very difficult. So if you want to be the CEO of a company, it requires a little bit of faith. That is a little bit of commitment and perseverance, even in the face of adverse evidence, to continue to go after the job of CEO. Or if you want to have a successful company, or if you want to be a grad student in philosophy and eventually get a PhD, all of these sort of long-term commitments require something like faith. That is a commitment, even in the face of counter evidence, to continue to be committed to the thing. And I think that's what faith is. I think that's totally rational. It's rational because it applies not only in the religious domain, it applies in every domain of our lives. Anytime you're sort of heading towards a difficult task or towards a difficult thing, and you're going to receive counter evidence that you're going to fail in the end, but it still makes sense to persevere, that's a case in which you need faith. I think the religious domain is like that. Nevertheless, I think also it's important to gather evidence. And if you have overwhelming evidence that your religious views are false, it's no longer heroic to continue to believe. It's just stupid. And so I would say the same thing about Christianity. I mean, if I have overwhelming evidence that Christianity is false, I'm an idiot if I continue to believe. So it's not heroic to keep believing in that case. I wouldn't even say it's an especially interesting form of faith. I think it's just foolishness. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think not only is reason able to lead you to God, it's crucial that it leads you to God. You should be led by reason to God? And if not, then you should ask yourself, what are you doing? Why would you believe in something this important just on the basis of no evidence at all or very little evidence?
I'm actually so glad you said that, because there's this idea that people simply believe. Does it make sense? Like everybody's just in la la land, just, you wake up, be like, well, I just happen to believe, right? But that's not what happens, right? If your faith is blind, then makes absolutely no sense, right? You need to have reasonable faith. As a matter of fact, one of the most renowned Christian apologist, William Lane Craig, has a website called Reasonable Faith, because the idea is that your faith needs to sort of follow the rules of reason, right? You need to have justified beliefs that go on to support the thing that you say you actually believe. Because if you believe in something, right, and then when asked about the reasons that justify you believe, you simply don't have any, then you should ask yourself, do you actually believe the things you say you believe, or why do you believe the things you say you believe, right? So I think that makes complete sense to me, and I can't wait to see what people have to say in the comments. Professor, we are, as we wrap up our conversation here that I've enjoyed thoroughly, I want to sort of share something with you, right? Unbeknownst to you, I consider you to be the spiritual founder of the Octagon of Reason. I shared this in the last episode, that even the first time I uttered the words Octagon of Reason was in a conversation with you around this time last year, when I was taking your class, Money, Markets, and Morals. So I want to thank you one more time, not only for accepting this invitation, but in a way for inspiring me on how to go about the Octagon of Reason. So thank you, sir. Thank you for being here. Thank you for accepting the invitation.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Love what you're doing. Hope for wonderful success for the channel.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, sir. So, just subscribe to our YouTube channel. For those of you who are watching us on YouTube, make sure you follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. That's where we publish all of our episodes. And make sure to follow me on my personal Instagram, because I also post a lot of Octagon of Reason content there. So thank you guys for watching us, and see you next time.